Hello, my name is Brandon Boyd, and for my Human Resource Management presentation, I will be looking at involuntary and voluntary turnover, and, more specifically, how involuntary and voluntary turnover affects those left in the company after the turnover. A lot of research exists on how turnover affects the specific person leaving the organization, but not as much focuses on what's left behind. As someone who has dealt with the after effects of both involuntary and voluntary turnover within a company, this is a topic I wanted to learn more about. Through research, I was able to find how to measure the impact of a turnover event and find ways to reduce issues for stayers post-turnover. Before we dive in, let's watch a short video to define turnover and get context on how much turnover is in different industries.
Many organizations have found that turnover is a very costly problem. Turnover is the process in which employees leave an organization and have to be replaced. The extent to which employers face high turnover rates and cost often varies by organization and industry. For example, the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, calculates that the average for all industries is 15% annual turnover. But companies in service industries such as restaurants have an annual rate of 35%. Entertainment and recreation has 27% turnover and retail 22%. Healthcare and social assistance have 20% annual turnover.
There are some very obvious effects of turnover when it occurs. Financially, turnover costs, for example, separation costs or replacement costs, range from 90% to 200% of the exiting employee's salary. Whatever is left of the work team, whether a replacement is added or not, is visibly changed too. But there are other considerations when assessing the aftermath of turnover. The social fabric of an organization is disrupted. Turnover also creates structural changes in work context, like job demands, resources, and work relationships, and grabs the attention of stayers. Ultimately, turnover serves as a starting point or new beginning for those who remain in the organization, for better or worse. The full impact of a turnover event can be seen in turnover event strength. Turnover event strength is defined as the extent to which the event alters work context and is perceived as impactful by the stayer. Event strength can be broken down into three subcategories: an event's novelty, or whether it was uncommon, new, or unexpected; an event's disruption, or how it creates discontinuities in the way tasks and operations are executed; an event's criticality, or its importance or priority for goal accomplishment. It is more likely for there to be structural changes within an organization when the turnover event strength is high. When a turnover event is highly novel, the organizational system is less prepared to deal with its consequences. When the event is disruptive, the organization system often recognizes need for adaptive response. When the event is critical, goals and goal accomplishment may be adjusted. We'll first look at turnover event novelty and how the impact of voluntary and involuntary turnover is affected by novelty. For both involuntary and voluntary turnover, the event is more likely to command attention and therefore be more impactful if the frequency of that type of turnover is low. The status and power of the employee leaving also affects the novelty of the event, as the higher the status of the leaver, the more impact it has on the stayer. The timing of the turnover event is another influential piece that affects the novelty for stayers. For voluntary turnover events, if an announcement or disclosure took place beforehand, it can be seen as a foretold, well-known event rather than being a source of panic if it occurs suddenly. Similarly, in an involuntary turnover event, when it can be anticipated through organizational actions like progressive discipline or programmed through a fixed contract with a client, the event is less novel. One other item that can create a high level of turnover event novelty, particularly after involuntary turnover, is under conditions of high employment security. Turnover event disruption and involuntary and voluntary turnover come next. Turnover events of star performers will be more disruptive, as their contributions are difficult to replace in the short term and will demand adaptations. Creating new routines, fixing previous performance problems, and the overall quote-unquote way of doing things will be impacted by turnover event disruption too. For involuntary turnover in particular, the scale and scope of the turnover event, for example a layoff, influences the amount of disruption experienced. For turnover event criticality, both involuntary and voluntary turnover may affect the emotions of stayers. Stayers can experience emotional reactions of anger or betrayal in the case of an involuntary turnover event involving a leaver they were close with, while voluntary turnover of someone they were close with may lead to a worsening of the work environment for them. Both types of turnovers can also spark quote-unquote Me Too types of feelings, and for voluntary turnover, those close to the leaver may now see previously unseen opportunities, while for involuntary turnover, those close to the leaver may increase the am I next to go type of feelings. Unfortunately, turnover is inevitable in business. However, there are ways to keep turnover event novelty, disruption, and criticality all on the low side. This is important in creating a positive work environment for stayers, as a positive perception of the job and the working environment have been associated with higher levels of job satisfaction and organizational commitment. There are situations where a disruptive turnover event cannot be avoided, for example, when a leader or highly central team member leaves. Studies have shown that teams required more time to recover after the loss of a manager than a non-manager, and having that understanding can help businesses. Here are some other ways to mitigate negative ramifications from turnover events. First, set up relational ties. Relational ties that may lead to lower turnover intentions and turnover in general include mentoring relationships, social media ties, perceived coworker support, satisfaction with coworkers, perceived supervisor support, high leader-member exchange, transformational leadership, and volunteer work. A sense of not fitting in or not having support can also result in a slow decline in positive effect toward the job and a decline in positive work attitudes. Fostering relationships also works directly after a turnover event, as findings have shown that intentionally promoting workplace communication and collaboration among staff following a departure of a coworker can reduce stress and minimize subsequent turnover among remaining staff. Additionally, teams with more collective experience tend to exhibit less task conflict following the loss of a team member. This creates an argument for cross-training, which involves team members training in the duties of their teammates as a preventative measure when turnover in the team is expected. While this may not mitigate the negative effects on team knowledge retention, it may at least put less stress on employees to have some idea of what the leavers did and be able to start taking on some of that work as needed on their own. Turnover can be a plus or minus in both cases of voluntary and involuntary turnover. For stayers at an organization post-turnover, there is undeniably going to be some effect on them as the result of a change at work. However, by being able to define the strength of the turnover event through novelty, disruption, and criticality, as well as having strategies in place to lessen the strength of that turnover event, you can greatly reduce or eliminate any additional turnover resulting from a turnover event. And here are my sources. Thank you.